Okay, welcome everybody to our called meeting. Thank you so much for being here. With 8 of 9 board members in attendance, we'll go ahead and get started with a moment of silence and the pledge led by Ms. Satterfield.
A moment of silence, please. And the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America
And
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we have a few announcements. Again, I'd like to welcome everybody and thank you for attending. As we announced earlier in this week, this meeting was called and is being attended electronically as necessary to protect the public health, safety, and welfare in light of the coronavirus 2019 emergency 2020 emergency provisions of Tennessee Governor Bill Lee's Executive Order number 16, dated March 20th, 2020. Executive Order number 16 suspends the requirements of the Tennessee Open Meetings Act to the extent necessary to allow any governing body subject to the requirements of this act to meet and conduct essential business by electronic means if the body determines meeting electronically is necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare of Tennesseans in light of the current epidemic. The suspension is also subject to making the meeting accessible to public attendance by electronic means, either by live access or by making the video recording of the meeting available to the public no later than 2 business days following the meeting. To meet the requirements of the order, we have made this meeting available to the public by live access, and will also make the video recording available on the KCS website as is part of our normal meeting procedures. In response to multiple requests from board members, Superintendent Thomas and myself agreed to call this meeting to specifically address the topic of online instructional materials during this unprecedented state of emergency in our community. Board members, you may be aware that Tennessee School Boards Association made a recommendation earlier in the week that all votes at electronic meetings held during this time be taken by roll call vote. So I'm requesting that we follow that recommendation. And finally, I would like to thank all of you, my fellow board members, and the KCS administrative staff for your tireless work this week. And thank you for making this fully electronic meeting a possibility, and in our desire to be transparent and accessible to the public. I appreciate the hard work that has gone into making this meeting available during this challenging time. And regardless, I can assure everybody watching that the board and the staff, their desire is that every student be taken care of during this time. And so I appreciate all the time and effort that's gone into the feeding, making sure that kids that are in need of food are getting food. And I know that the staff has been working really hard in that regard, and that the staff wants the best for our children. And so we are appreciative to them for that. Are there any changes to our meeting agenda today? Okay, do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion by Ms. Gill, a second by Ms. Satterfield. All in favor? Just
Aye.
raise. Aye. We have to do a roll call for that, Gary?
I don't think so. As long as we can see everybody's hand on that one, we're probably okay.
Okay, everybody got your hand up? Okay, I think we're good.
Could I ask a question? Susan, I'm getting texted by some people that don't know how to find this online. Where do people find this online currently, or find it live?
It's on the Knox County Board of Education webpage, right?
Yeah, so I actually just pulled that link up. So if you go to, it may look different based on where you are, but if they go to knoxschools.org, go to our district and then Board of Education,
Okay,
and then go to watch meetings,
okay.
they should see the link. It's a little harder to find on a phone versus a laptop, I
Okay,
think.
thank you.
Okay. Okay, Ms. Coatney, could you go ahead and read the item into the record, please?
Yes, discussion and possible action on online instructional materials.
Okay. And we will just, the procedure that we will use is if you would just raise your hand if you need to make a comment, and I'll try to keep track of who in the order of those hands as they're raised, and we'll just go through with our comments. And I know that staff has some updates that they probably need to provide to us. So Mr. Superintendent, would you like for board members to speak, or do you have staff that would like to go ahead and present some information?
We have staff, as you said, here. So again, I wanted to just say how much I appreciate our child nutrition staff. Brett Foster, our executive director, has done a great job. But again, it continues to be a work in progress, but we're very, very pleased with how things have gone this far, and we want to be responsive, to all of our students who are in need. So again, just to express my appreciation there. And let me just say to staff, I know last week was spring break week, but just know that staff worked, we worked every day, and staff is working hard to try to make sure that we can do the things that we can do from a legal standpoint, and still provide educational opportunities for our students. So Dr. Riswick, and let me just say he and his staff have done a great job. They've sort of worked on a plan that we would like to talk about with the board right now in terms of, when we were working last week, we thought maybe we would be back in school initially. Obviously, that didn't happen, and it's been extended, and who knows, it may even be extended longer. So in anticipation of that possibly happening, we and Dr. Riswick and his team have been working on a plan. So at this time, unless the board wants to start by asking questions, Dr. Riswick is prepared to sort of go through the plan for you, and then that may generate questions. So certainly we're willing to do, Madam Chair, whatever you and the board wish for us to do. But
Yeah, I think that would be great to hear from Dr. Riswick first, and then board members can weigh in unless anybody's opposed to that. Okay, let's go ahead and hear from Dr. Riswick. Thanks so much. And I as we are, Dr. Riswick is our Chief Academic Officer, just for those of you watching.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
We should all go on mute.
Okay, all right. Sorry about that. So I think all of you received a copy of kind of the written part of the plan with some bullet points to look at. So I'm going to try not to read to you, but just kind of go over some of the highlights of it, and then allow you to ask questions. So the superintendent had come to us and kind of asked, there's really no playbook for this. Kind of difficult at this to figure out how we continue. We've seen, the governor say we'll continue education and do some of those kinds of things, and it's hard with some of the stuff that to try to get that done. So the superintendent asked us to kind of work on a plan. So let me say on two things before I go into some of the plan. The first is that we understand that this plan does not replace regular instruction. So the plan we'll be talking about today, the content that we would be using in that would be more review that would be appropriate for the grade level or for the subject that those students are enrolled in. So again, doesn't replace that because we're still closed. The other, I'll say this, no plan that we've seen across the state is perfect. It's not going to answer all the questions when we talk about all the equity issues that are out there, all the ability for, you can't put a teacher in every house, that kind of thing. So there's going to be some things from this that I think you'll see there still are some issues with it. But for the means that we have, we felt like this was probably our best plan if we choose to deploy that. So kind of in a nutshell, the first piece of that is, I'll start with our high schools. Our high schools would be the most difficult for us to go to a paper kind of packet. And the reason for that is high school schedules, as you know, are every student has a very different schedule. So it's not necessarily, if you're a freshman, you know, you might be in English 1, but you might have a variety of maths you might be taking, a variety of sciences you might be taking. So we couldn't just make a 9th grade packet for every high school student in Knox County. And for that reason, what we're proposing in this plan is that we would do that through online. It would be nice if as a district we were online before that. It's hard to, you know, prop something like this up in the middle of a crisis, but we do have some online capabilities. We do have software and a learning platform in Canvas, Aspen, Microsoft Team, which is a newer one for some of our teachers, but Canvas and Aspen, they're pretty well trained in, as are our parents and students. And then, you know, the old-fashioned telephone is a way to do that too. So we felt like it would be hard to roll out a new technology again in the middle of this crisis, but if we can build on what our teacher and staffs already know. One of the issues with that is our devices. We have a lot of devices in the district, but again, they're not uniformly distributed. Different schools have different amounts of those. Some of that's been based on different funding sources, how they've accrued those. But at this point, we feel like going online with our high schools, because of the variety of programming, would be the way to go. And so what we would do with that, we still, to the extent possible, would want to try to create some common resources that could be used by teachers. So I'll go back to my example of like an Algebra 1 or an English 1 or an English 2. In order to kind of get as equitable as we can, we would like to produce with teams of teachers working with our teaching and learning department some lessons that would make sense. So there may be a lesson for an English 10 class, there may be a lesson for a geometry class that we could post online, so that families who had computers at home or telephones at home could access those. And then their teachers would be reaching out to them again through Canvas or Aspen, Microsoft Team, or through the phone to give them support. We would want to put parameters around that for teachers, because we understand teachers have families at home too, and it wouldn't be a 24/7 expectation that they're kind of a one-on-one tutor. What we've seen in other districts is that there's kind of a designated time. It may be 2 or 3 times a week that they're available for an hour, you know, or 2-hour block, something like that, for students to be able to either watch the lesson, watch them teach to that kind of common resource, and or ask questions. You know, again, then we want the teachers to have the flexibility not to be on all the time. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we'd be looking at with the high school. There are some challenges on we have deployed before, even to a one-to-one school, kind of the deployment of devices and that sort of thing. So we have some knowledge on how to do that. Our biggest thing would be trying to pull the resources and devices to make sure we can distribute those to every high school student that needs it. Again, we wouldn't think that the district's going to provide one for everyone, but students who already have that device at home and can address that, they could use their device for that. So it would kind of be a needs base that we would try to cover based on that. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we look at for the high schools. When you look at K through 8, then we kind of look at that in 3 grade bands. We look at K2, and our strategy on this would be to go more paper packets with support from online. So we would have K2 packets, and that would be created again by teams of teachers working with teaching and learning supervisors, and what those could potentially, I'll give you kind of what that looks like. So 2nd grade may have a math lesson, an English lesson, a science lesson, a social studies lesson. Unfortunately, because we don't have the capacity to go beyond that, we would have to really focus, I think, in those 4 areas. So it would be limited, but again, it's not new material, it's more of a review material. I should have said that back on the high schools. It's very difficult to do performance-based classes like CTE or the arts and those sorts of classes. Very hard to do that from a distance perspective. So we would be paring down to really focus on the 4 areas that I just mentioned with math, science, English, and social studies. So same thing in grades K8. Our focus would be on those 4 subjects, providing probably a lesson that's grade appropriate for each one of those. We would have paper packets that we feel like we could distribute through our 25 sites where we're doing food distributions for students who couldn't get online, but for the majority who could, again, through their phone or through a device they may have at home, they could access that. have access to the resource that's there. And one additional that we'd be doing for those, we think we could use our KCS TV station and program in a teacher to be able to come in. It may be hard the first week if we were to turn this quickly. We might have to use some more district folks to do that because we don't want to give teachers lead time to be able to come in and be familiar with a lesson. But we would have them come in and teach the class. So again, what that could look like. So if Monday was math day and we staggered, it would take 4.5 hours of half-an-hour lessons to program that into our KCS TV station. So we could have a variety of teachers teaching that half-an-hour lesson that would cover like all of second grade, then all of third grade, and all of fourth grade. Maybe half-an-hour increments between those. Students would have access to watch those online. It may not be their teacher, but it would be a Knox County teacher in that grade level teaching that class and giving them some support, and the parents and guardian support for, again, that common resource that they had picked up through the packet, or they could print it offline because we posted in both places. Our hope would be, again, a lot of folks could access that online, and if they couldn't, they could come to one of our 25 distribution sites to pick that up. So if they did come get the paper packets, we would, it would save us time not to give them just the second grade, but to give them K2. We think that also would allow a second grader to go back and maybe practice some first grade skills, that sort of thing. And then our next packet would be a 3-5 packet. Again, we won't go through all that again, but the same idea. And then we would have a 6-8 packet. Ideally, we'd be online all the way through middle school if we could. We don't really have the resource to do that right now. And because of the scheduling issues, high school would be our focus for that. In addition to other things that we've talked about that we would need some outside help, we have had a lot of our nonprofit community supporters that have asked what they could do. We would like to approach them and ask them to adhere to everything that the Knox County Health Department is saying around, number of people who should be gathering and that sort of thing, but potentially have them in some of our underserved communities, maybe have a learning lab or multiple learning labs. Some of our nonprofits already do that, but maybe limit that to 8 to 10 students, again, doing the social distancing and maybe by appointment to be able to give families another point of access if they needed some computers and technology. And then one of the other big things that would help us out immensely for that on access would be to maybe approach some of our local officials and ask them to help us work on, during this crisis time, an ability to secure free internet. I know that there's a lot of different companies talking about a lot of different things, but we would, again, ask our other county officials to help us and try to make that a community-wide effort to be able to see what we could do during this crisis to make that more accessible to families. So I think I've covered most of what was in it, so I'm happy to try to answer questions if you have them.
Can you talk a little bit, and I don't know how much has been shared with everybody, but can you talk a little bit on the situation with students who have an AP? Will teachers be able to, can you just overview that a little bit?
Sorry.
Do I need to ask a
Could you please
specific
repeat?
question?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't have the volume up.
No, you're fine. So can you just talk a little bit about, because the biggest questions that I've had were from teachers who teach AP. And so what does that look like for students who need this last part of the segment? Because it looks like we're just going over stuff we've already been previously learning. So what does that look like for students that need a test come June?
Sure. So AP is one of the things where their College Board is the organization that controls or that runs AP. So each one of these groups have made different decisions. IB is another one that's made a decision. They're outside of Knox County control on that. So College Board has decided to offer and to continue to offer to students who enroll in AP classes instruction. So they have an online. I have actually a daughter who's in 3 of those right now. So there's an online program for that where they can log in and get the lesson and support for that through College Board. Also. They are looking at, as far as the requirement for the test, that they're going to provide that actually online to students in a 45-minute form. So they would have that, and they're also offering families the opportunity, if they choose not to participate in that test, to potentially get a refund for that. One other thing that I know, the state board has a called meeting on April the 9th, and we've heard one of the topics that they'll be discussing. I know one thing that matters a lot to our families and our students, because they worked hard, is what about the incentive points and the weighted average that goes with that too. We have actually talked to the state board, our rep as well, on that, and I think that they'll be giving us some guidance out of that April 9th meeting, so that families have a better idea on on some of those kinds of things. But, you know, I think, again, if high schools are going online, if we're able to do that, I think that would be one of those areas that would just be a course that teacher is already teaching. So I think that would be one of those situations where we would allow them to continue to support how they needed to support. So it might be an exception to the rule of what we're doing in some of the other courses.
Okay, I had a question along those lines because from my understanding, AP teachers don't have to teach their units in a specific order. And so for instance, a teacher that has taught an AP unit, maybe they taught less units 5 and 6, but now AP has said that they will only test on, 1, 2, and 3. So they've taught it out of order. So in that sort of case, what would be the role of the teacher? And you mentioned the online lesson. So can you talk, does my question make sense, first of all? And how would that teacher approach that? Is that teacher going to be free to direct her students in that manner?
Yeah. So to answer your question, the online, and we've been told the same thing, I left that out before. AP or College Board has given guidance that instead of holding, I think the way they've worded it is this, that they will weight their test toward the first half of what's been instructed before the crisis came. So where usually you might have had the whole curriculum for an AP course. Oh, wait, sorry.
Hold on just a second. I think we have a technical difficulty. I think that somebody, I think Mike possibly has done something on his screen. There we go. We're good.
Sorry.
We're good now.
Sorry. Did I disappear for a minute?
You're back.
Okay.
No worries.
Sorry about that. My computer did something, but okay. So what they're saying is typically, you'd cover that whole course in a semester or in a year, depending on the schedule. Most of ours are in a semester. So what AP realizes is that everyone's learning was disrupted pretty much about halfway through that course. So they're going to weight the AP exam for that subject more toward the content that was covered in the first half, if you're following kind of the national sequence of how that would happen. So to answer your question, Ms. Horn, I think that is true. And I think that's how their online instruction is weighted more toward that and not as much toward the new instruction that's there, but to review and support what's already happened. But our teachers, we would allow to, I think, again, that'd be one of those places where we would allow them to teach and not just cover what's been covered before.
Okay, because I've heard from teachers that their view is that they haven't taught it the way everybody else has. So their student would be at a disadvantage if they cannot teach the content that they haven't covered yet.
I would say,
so if they can teach it, that's fine.
Our teachers who teach AP have to submit their syllabus to College Board in order for it to be an AP course. So there may be some people who have taught some things out of sequence. I'm not aware of that. I mean, it'd kind of be a case by case situation, but I would think those teachers would know that, and knowing what College Board is stressing now and what they're doing for online, they could between now and then potentially be focusing in that area.
Okay, that's fine. As long as they can communicate and their kids know that and are prepared for it, I think that would be acceptable. Okay. Any other questions specifically on AP? Okay. Can I just ask a clarifying question regarding high school in general? So what about other high school classes? CTE will that will probably really not much is going to happen for CTE. Is that correct?
Correct. And it's very difficult. The three areas that we're saying that we're kind of performance-based, if you want to use that term, you've got fine arts, you have kind of PE or any kind of physical activity course, and then you also have CTE. A lot of that is hands-on, a lot of that's performance, a lot of that's demonstration. What we are going to allow, and Shannon just reminded me of this, and I'm glad she did, we said that about AP, but any student who's enrolled in an EPSO, which would give them a credit or credential post-high school, that entity is still allowing to happen, we're going to allow that to continue. So we do have some students who are doing some online industry certifications and things like OSHA 10 that would have had no bearing on their high school credit. It would have been kind of above and beyond what they're doing in the course. We worked with Dr. Wilson on that, and those will continue to happen. Same thing with advanced placement. IB is doing something a little bit different, but same thing there for, we'll allow the teachers to continue to do what they need to. Dual enrollment is another one too. Those students are dually enrolled, so they're also a college student. So most of those colleges are going online, and we've worked with, most of ours are either at Rome State or at Pellissippi. They're working with those professors to be online and be treated like a college student. So we just didn't feel like anything we have control over, and we think we'll get guidance from the commissioner about our ability to waive credits and those sorts of things. We felt like we could kind of slow down on those, but anything that was something that was an outside institution awarding for students, we didn't feel like we should stop.
Okay, great. Any other question on AP or any of what he's covered? Ebony?
So John, we're waiting on the more direction on like how we will grade for spring and graduation requirements, or have we made that decision as a district yet?
So that won't be a district decision. Well, it may be a district decision, but that decision has to be made. So you've got our next point meeting that we should get some guidance from is on April 9th. There's a called State Board of Education meeting. And our understanding is in that the state board will potentially be taking some action where we're not totally clear. I mean, you guys know this, they're kind of like us, like you're the board to our staff, the department is the staff, and the state board is their board. So I'm not sure that we'll have clear direction out of that meeting, but I think if there is asked for things like waiving credits or, what those kinds of things mean, I think the state board will take action. They may toss it back to the department, but that should be the first hurdle to giving us clarity. But we haven't received clarity from the state yet. All we've heard is for students who were on track to graduate, we won't keep them from getting a diploma. So there's a lot of thinking, what does it mean to be on track to graduate and that sort of thing. So we hopefully after the April 9th meeting, we'll have a little more clarity.
What about those students who are not on track to graduate, students who are doing recovery credits?
Ms. Owen, that's a great question because, we have students through whatever circumstances have happened that they're able to obtain sometimes 6 credits in that final semester as opposed to just the 4. I think we'll have to wait to get some guidance on that. I'm not sure. What we do know is the state requires the 22. Knox County requires 28 credits for graduation. We have the local ability to waive that down to 22. What we don't have the local ability to do is waive it less than what the state requires. So we'll have to get guidance from them on that.
So if they were already working, say, at maybe Kelly Academy, would they be able to work on those credits or not?
We had, we have a program called Edgenuity that a lot of those students work on. And it has been it's a recovery credit software. We have not these past 2 weeks been allowing that, but I think that's definitely something that we need to consider moving forward. I think as the superintendent mentioned earlier, I think, our hope was we were returning after April 3rd, and with testing out of the way or for the year, we felt like we were going to have time to make that up. But now that we've got this extended time, I think we have to make decisions on that kind of thing, maybe to open that back up and allow students to do that.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions around anything that Dr. Reiswick has already covered?
Well, I don't know if this is for Dr. Reiswick, but it kind of goes back with the technology aspect. Are we going to move on from, or you want me to just ask it?
Yeah, I would like to move toward talking about exactly what it's going to look like for our middle school and high and elementary age. Is that kind of where you were going?
Yeah.
Okay,
But
that's what I think.
That's a question.
Ms. Babb.
Yes, I've had a question kind of as and this goes into this topic, especially maybe with elementary school, when we talk about we're sticking with the 4 main courses, and I just would like this to be considered, is I do think there's some capabilities, because I'm being contacted by these teachers, of art, music, PE, that they could maybe with like this KCS TV or Knox County Schools TV or something like that, that maybe there could be a period of offering some of that online. And so maybe thinking about that there are some PE instruction and things like that, that I don't want to totally forget about those. Obviously, I think our core subjects are very important. But I have been contacted about teachers dying to share their expertise.
Okay, I have a question on that to that topic. So and I don't see Dr. Oh, there you are. Okay, so is it possible, and this kind of gets into our conversation also for K through 8. So if let's just take music, for instance, or art, because we can talk about that kind of generally for the school. If a music teacher at a school would like to put information for the whole school at large, on their Canvas page, or send it in an email to the school from the principal, like if that kind of thing. I know there's been a lot of conversation around district level, what's going to be offered at the district level. And so can you talk about what specific schools can do, how specific schools can submit information, whether they'll be able to communicate with their kids through a school newsletter? Can you kind of talk about that, please?
Sure. Thanks for the question. I want to say first, if I can, to Ms. Babb's question. I totally, and I think the superintendent's been real clear on that too, when we totally value the arts and CET and physical education is very important. I think, again, kind of back to what I said at the beginning, had we had the resource to have these all up and running prior to the crisis hitting, I think we could have been in a better place to go full across the board. I think, we're very hopeful that this plan will work for those 4 areas, and we're totally open to expand that to other things. I think we probably want to start smaller, and then if it's working fine, and continue to expand that out. It'd just be, probably because again, we're very hopeful this plan will work, but we've never run it at this scale before. But I think we could, and Dr. Heiss has been working on, our humanities supervisor has been working on plans to have that. So I don't think that's out of question that we could get that done. Ms. Horn, your question around teacher access to students through this process, I think that's part of the flexibility of this plan. Up till now, because we couldn't ensure equity for all students, and there are lots of things that go along with that. I think Mr. Dupler shared some of those with you guys. It's been kind of our place to be able to say, a lot of things could be interpreted as instruction and not instruction. I think moving forward, if we do this plan, I think those would be decision points we would need to make. We want to be mindful of our teachers as well, that they're dealing with the same disruptions that we're all dealing with in our lives. So anything we can do to help with that, and also to be able to try to ensure as much equity as we can, that would be why we would like teams of teachers to create a common resource. So if that's the common denominator for a 3rd grade ELA class to fall back on, and a first-year teacher feels like that's what he or she can support, then we've helped create that resource for them, because we are aware they're not going to have their full team for planning and those sorts of things. It's not saying individual teachers can't make those decisions. Just as a district, we'd like to provide some of that. I think that's up for the discussion to say, if a teacher wants to provide something additional to that, I think we'd be open for that conversation. I think, just be an awareness around equity and support is what we've been looking for.
So, okay. So it would not then be possible for, let's say, a school to have, a principal send out something that said, or maybe just if, I'm thinking about like for a school, their 5th grade science teachers, for them to submit one thing that if they were giving something to their students, would that go through the central office then to be spread out to everybody versus only being for that school? Does that make sense?
It does. I think, let me say this too, probably left this out at the beginning. Everything we'd be doing moving forward is voluntary and not mandatory. As far as the students go, there'd be no positive or negative impact on a student's grade based on that, right? So this would all just be kind of what the governor's challenge is. It would all be just keeping kids in grade level and subject level learning that they're doing, so that they don't have that big learning gap whenever we get to return to school. So what we want to do is kind of provide the bare minimum for that. Up till now, again, we have not been allowing that, just because we weren't sure where we were legally to be able to offer kind of different things and open up the opportunity for some inequity and disparity to be out there. I think we still would feel comfortable with saying at the bare minimum, there's this resource out there. But I definitely think that's a point that, we could consider. If someone wants to provide additional things to their 5th grade science class, Again, it's all voluntary, none of it's mandatory. I don't think we would have an issue with that. We just want to make sure that, again, every teacher doesn't feel the pressure to have to go create that because school X did and school Y has to, we want to say, here's a district resource to use, and we would like for you to support this for your kids. If someone wants to go above and beyond that, I think we would just ask again that they be mindful of, of parents and the disruption that they have as well in their lives, so it doesn't, they don't feel compelled to have to do homeschool, if you would.
Mr. Dupler, would you like to weigh in on, does anybody have anyone have questions specifically on that point for Dr. Ryswick? Terry?
Yes, thank you guys, all of you, for what you have done. I know this has been very challenging, to say the least. Is what I'm hearing you say, John, is from assuming the board approves this, that I think it's understood that nothing would be graded, that nothing would be required. However, we are taking the any restrictions off of our teachers being allowed to put resources out there, and the freedom for them to do what they know would be best for their particular class. I mean, these teachers know the classes now. They've had these kids for several months. So I think it's real important that each teacher is given some autonomy to be able to address what they know is right for their class, because that's not going to be the same for everyone. Is this what you're thinking?
Yeah, I would say, again, our intent was never to have centralized control over that, because we don't have trust of our teachers. I mean, we know they're the lifeblood that makes this thing work. What teachers do in the classroom every day is what makes education happen and learning happen. So in no way was it ever meant to be that. It was really more about the equity and diversity, and we've gotten a lot of guidance on that. Initially, when all this happened, there was some high level federal guidance, and again, Mr. Dupler knows more about that than I do. And there was a lot of risk taking to kind of have people doing different kinds of things. But I would say we have total faith in our teachers, and we'd be confident with that, with the superintendent's direction with where we needed to move with that.
Okay, and just to be clear, also, the only thing that we are talking about at this point that has anything to do with actually receiving credit is just some of our AP and CTE and those type of things. Everything else from kindergarten on up is strictly voluntary.
Correct. And even doing the early post-secondary opportunities, even that's voluntary for a student. So
Right.
if a student was taking industry certification online, again, I keep thinking of Ocean 10, that's what Dr. Wilson, or OSHA 11, Ocean 10's a movie, OSHA 11, that Dr. Wilson talked to us about earlier this week. And I think we had over 700 kids who did that last semester in a health science kind of one class. So wanting to keep students in that and continue to give them that opportunity. If a family or student decides that that's not what they want to do, it's not going to affect that health science one credit or for the first level credit at all. But if students do want to finish that up and have that certification for after they graduate, then they'll still have that opportunity to earn that online. And there's a few other industry certs that are doing that as well. So we don't want to inhibit that, but you are correct. The grades at this point, we're not giving any more grades out there. They're frozen where they are till we get further guidance from the state. All of the things that we will be doing now and the resources we're providing are voluntary, not mandatory, and really just to provide our families more resource to keep their students engaged in appropriate grade and subject level learning.
All right, thank you.
Get this going with Terry's question real quick, and then I'm sorry, Susan, go ahead. I'm sorry.
You're muted.
You're muted.
Sorry. Christy has a question, but if it's a follow-up to Terry's, go ahead.
It is. And is that the same with the statewide dual credit as well, John? The statewide dual credit classes? Do you
those
know?
May be a little bit different because all the other ones, there's an outside entity that's driving that, again, like a community college or a national certification board on industry certs, or college board. When it comes, we haven't gotten guidance yet. That is actually awarded by the state itself, which is, current position is to not have school until we get, till after the 24th. So I think that's probably something we may get guidance, maybe out of the April 9th meeting, or maybe something straight from the commissioner.
Okay, Miss Christie.
Yeah, I just have a question. I mean, how much of this has been vetted through, like, have we sent any of this out to our teacher advisory committee or our administrators? I mean, because I feel like they're the real experts on, their schools and their communities and what their students need. And I would kind of like a little feedback from the people in the schools, like our administrators and teachers, to see, I don't want to jump into something, especially, when we talk about lawsuits and things like that, without getting their opinions on this as well. So, I mean, have we had any communications with them about it?
I think that's a great question, and I think that's definitely something we need to consider. We have not. I mean, we have the different advisory councils that we have, and of course, with the closure, we haven't been having those meetings, trying to have no more than 10 people in a room. But I think you make a good point, and we don't pretend to know more than they do about their neighborhoods and their communities that they serve. So we totally support that. Again, the superintendent asked us to put together a plan that that potentially could be feasible, and I think that's the first step with us designing this plan. And then I think you make a good suggestion for another step.
Okay, I have a couple of questions, and I'm not sure if you know the answer to this one at this point, but I know this has come up. I just was looking at some notes I've taken as I've gotten emails from people. And, since we're just high school classes that are not AP, just maybe an honors English class. If you're on a block schedule, those students have only gotten half their content to this point. So, depending on whether we go back to school in a month, regardless, have we, and I know you probably haven't gotten this far yet, but are we looking at options for the summer for, for Algebra 1, if a child has only gotten half that content, because that's going to be a serious issue for, I think for younger kids, we knew that TCAP is coming, and so a lot of their content has been covered. But for the high school kids that have they've only gotten half their content, that's a big concern for parents, I know.
I'll jump in. Well, I'm gonna let Shannon Jackson address more detail on that, because her team has done some incredible work on that. But I'll say this, definitely. I mean, a lot of those courses are sequential. So if you've missed half of a semester of Algebra 1 and you're going into geometry, now you've got to make that up somehow. So I'm gonna have her address. Her team has been thinking through that.
Yeah. So my team, as soon as we had the initial shutdown, we started brainstorming all the different scenarios that we might encounter with curriculum, and they are working in their facilitator teams right now, just because our teachers were on spring break last week. They are starting to move forward with requesting some teachers to support them, looking at what content has been covered, depending on when we might go back different times. They're looking at what content won't be covered, and making some plans so that everybody knows. 8th grade right now in social studies is about to start the Civil War. So we know that that's content that 8th graders will not have covered at this point, or 6th grade was starting Rome. So when are the appropriate times to cover that content? What does it look like? And putting that together with the consultation of teachers who are experts in those different grade levels and the grade level beyond, because we could be looking at having to do some truncated or bridge curriculum as we move into a different school year. So that's something that definitely we're putting some skeleton plans together so that people have a framework for thinking about it, and then engaging with teachers to make that plan fully actionable.
Okay, great. Thank you. I have another question, Dr. Ryswick. I know that several of the schools have different online resources that they've paid for, I had made some notes on which ones. iReady, Ticket to Read, Study Island. I know we approve those. So I know that different schools have different online subscriptions that they've already purchased. That seems like that would be, a great tool for those schools to continue to be able to use online. Can we have some discussion around those options?
Sure, I'm going to let Ms.
Jackson.
Jackson speak to that again.
Thank you.
Yeah, so those are already available for people to use, and we've actually been working with a lot of our vendors to allow district-wide access. So as we have gotten that permission and figured out a way to get some logins, we've been adding that to the district site. We're looking very carefully to make sure that as vendors do open up some of that access, that they are not charging something that we don't see on the front end, or that we're making sure that all of our data sharing protocols are in place. So we've been slow to get them up because we're working with our IT department to make sure that it's okay, and that we're keeping track of those contracts. But anything that the schools have already been using, that's been fully operational for those specific schools, and we're working to try to get as many of them district-wide in those grade levels as possible.
Okay, and I think that's an area where teachers would like to be able to provide some insight to parents of where to go in those programs. Maybe and maybe that can just be something that I think, like Miss Christie said, some feedback from teachers on how to get that to their students in a way that could benefit the district at large, and at least their own school.
This one, I think, you make a good point. I think, again, now that we have a little more clarity and a little more guidance, I think that we'll be able to guide our teachers a little more to yours and Ms. Hill's questions around being able to allow more of that. I think we were just uncertain based on some of the guidance, again, that we were getting from the federal government, just uncertain. So I think we'll be able to open up some of those channels.
Okay, that'll be great. And I just to kind of give, and I know we've all seen a lot of these emails, but just to kind of summarize the emails that I've seen, and I'm sure you guys have, parents are, if they're working at home, they're trying to work. Yes, we've put resources on our website, but that would take them hours to wade through and try to figure out what their student needs to do. So I think that, that I'm glad you're working on this plan that will be specific to specific grade levels and subjects, because it needs to be as easy as possible so that it can really be useful, because parents just don't have time to wade through 50 different websites. Ms. Satterfield?
Yes, so I hear that, and I also just want to make sure, because I know Gary's going to talk to us a little bit about the legalities, but I also want to make sure that we're not crossing that, like going above, making sure that our teachers know that this is resource and full out instruction shouldn't be taking place because of the equitable aspect. And so I know that given what you just said, Susan, that, the expectation is that parents are still working, so go do your school, but making sure that we don't have a lot of teachers that are doing full out instruction versus teachers who are following the guidelines of providing the resources. So I think we do need to make a clear decision on what is expected of educators, because that's a fine line.
Well, and also to the point that Dr. Reiswick made earlier, I think we all recognize that our teachers a lot of them are home with their own children. They don't have hours on end to be working on content for their students. So I think that that's the last thing that I'm definitely not thinking that teachers need to spend all their time working while they're at home. That we should have some streamline processes. Mr. Dupler, do you want to weigh in on the equity issue?
Sure, be happy to. What we've been talking about mainly with Mr. Thomas and his leadership team is that the law has put the school system in a box on this particular subject due to the crisis. State constitution provides that an education should be provided in an adequate manner and equitably, but a lot of the federal law supersedes that and puts additional requirements that make it very difficult to to provide the services and the educational programming in an equitable manner. So what we've seen recently from the Tennessee Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education, what were guidance and more of advice or recommendation, but not real concrete waivers or something legally that the district can hang its hat on. But that has been evolving pretty rapidly this week, particularly due to what's going on elsewhere with the crisis. So just last night, there was some additional guidance from the Tennessee Department of Education that made it more clear that at least that department was wanting districts to offer more resources online and more resources remotely, obviously with buildings being closed. So that's evolving. Congress has taken a look at this issue, and I know the Senate had passed a bill yesterday evening. To my knowledge, the House hasn't passed it yet, but that's ongoing. I mean, that could be happening right now, today. So again, things are happening much more rapidly than they would otherwise. So what's true today could be different tomorrow. But that's the difficulty the district has been facing is rolling out some educational programming that is also equitable.
Okay. Other questions?
Yes, I have a question oh, go ahead, Bab. I've been talking a lot. I'm sorry, Susan. It's hard for me to do this.
I understand. Okay, and Ms. Bab, and then I know Ms. Owen, I think, has a question also.
Ms. Owen, yes.
Ms. Owen, why don't you go first? Because I think we've already heard from Ms. Bab once.
Okay, I just wanted to know if we have any plan for allowing teachers to access their building to get those materials that they don't have.
Bob, would you have an answer on, did you hear Ms. Owen's question about teachers accessing the building to get materials they may need?
We've talked about that. I know, and I think we've got, we'll be getting some information out so that we can do that. We just need to make sure we do it in a manner that follows the guidelines that, no more than 10 folks in the building at the time and all. So we'll get some information out soon in regards to how that process will work.
Thank you.
Ms. Babb?
Yes, and I don't know if this question is for Mr. Dupler or Mr. Myers, but if we could speak to the special ed education, IEPs, that sort of issue that I know is weighing on a lot of people's minds.
I defer to Mr. Myers first. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, without getting too much into the legality, the recent guidance that Mr. Dupler referenced earlier does, it frees us up a little bit with the piece of it being, non-mandatory and those things. So for us, in terms of the entire Department of Student Supports, I've assigned members of my special ed team, my ELL team, and to represent Section 504 and our pre-K services to work with that team to try to ensure that our materials are going to be accessible to our students. The new guidance makes it pretty clear that, as long as we're not providing, as long as we're not trying to move forward as though school is happening, we're not necessarily in a position where we have to provide services to the letter of the IEP, because as you all know, we have around 8,000 IEPs in our district, and around 830 of those students spend most of their time, as in more than around half the time, in the special ed setting, which means they're getting some pretty specific and direct special education services. So, the plan for my team would be to really work with families who again wanted to participate in this voluntary continued instruction. My folks would work consultatively with some of those families to help them meet the needs of their students if they chose to work on these voluntary resources.
Okay, does that answer your, Virginia? I think you're muted.
I just do know that I especially, SPED students, a lot of them even would just love to hear from their teachers. I think just that lack of contact when they're used to a routine and that type of routine communicating with the teacher, obviously with limits, but I do think if we can free that up some, I think that would be very beneficial to some of our families.
Sure.
Absolutely. I heard from a dad who said the same thing, that it would be a huge benefit to his child to be able to have some communication. Okay, Ebony.
Thank you, board member, the board chair, Susan. Question, can we talk a little bit about the distribution of the packets, and is there anything that we can do with the bus routes, and just kind of the thought behind not using the bus routes for pickup, or just kind of talk about the distribution so that people that are on can know how that process will work, and then talk about the reasoning behind not using the bus routes, or if it's something we can use.
Bob, is Russ, do you want to speak to that, or is Russ available?
Yeah, Russ is available if he can navigate here and get on.
Yeah.
Oh, come on, Mr. Russ.
We want to see your face. Let's see
We
your
heard you laugh. We heard you.
I know you're there.
So let me try. You're asking me to push too many buttons at the same time.
You can do it.
But the distribution method that we had talked about with respect to with C&I with respect to packets has basically been twofold. One is electronic, that they would be up and available on our website for folks to access and use in that manner, or to print and at home and use in that manner as well. And then to make them available at our 25 meal distribution sites as well. I think it gets problematic to start talking. We don't have the same restriction on distributing packets through bus routes as we do with food, because the packets are totally internal to us. But I think you do run into some problems when you start trying to distribute that type of material at bus routes and at bus stops, and pulling kids out and having large numbers of kids gather at bus stops, and you would have a prolonged stop, and I think it would be challenging. Plus, you would also be bringing lots of people into a point, or potentially bringing lots of people into a point that would violate the social distancing guidelines that we're trying to operate under right now, and the safer at home guidelines as well.
Okay. Ms. Babb, is your question as a follow-up to that specific question?
It is. On that same question, I'm having, especially since 25 sites are not very much in the West Knoxville area, could there be some distribution from the schools? Because there's a lot of our areas that don't really have the pickup sites. That would be one question. And then I had another one, I can't remember with that. But anyway, that would be the first one, is if at the school, I know, because I know that we were talking about earlier that some kids weren't able to get to the schools for food, that the child had to actually be available. But if we know of people that don't have transportation that might need the packets, would we have the ability to actually have some delivery services? I mean, I can't tell you how many people out in our community want to help in some way, that if we can facilitate that in some way, that would be great.
I would say that would be possible. We're working on a volunteer delivery process right now. So I could say that would probably be possible on an exceptional basis, meaning we could probably do that on a limited scale. I don't think we could deliver packets to 6,000 homes or something along that line.
Okay.
I'm more was concerned with people that truly have dire circumstances, have no transportation, that type of stuff. So it would definitely be on a smaller scale, I would hope.
Two, I think that it would also have to be, those cases would need to be identified through the school administration. So, all of the information that we get needs to come back to us through school administration, because they have some ability to vet it just by their proximity and knowledge of individual circumstances that we have no ability to see from the district level.
Okay. Okay, I know Miss Christie had a question.
Actually, I have two. One is for Jason, but the other one is when we talk about packets, we're talking about worksheets, right? Is that basically worksheets of review materials? Is that what these packets are going to consist of?
We're actually trying to make them so that they aren't just worksheets, that they might be some tasks. As I was talking with, with our social studies team, we talked about, this is a great time for thinking about this event as a primary source experience. And so it's more of an activity and a task that they may work through. And then what we're planning to do on the TV channel is have somebody who's walking through that activity. So if a student doesn't know what to do with it, or they try to do something with it, then the teacher who's running that 30-minute segment is addressing the material in that packet. So the child is getting at least a little bit of, I guess, ongoing discussion around that content. And then we've also, Jean Heiss has continued, because we aren't able to do this for all of those encore areas. She is working within those videos, a 2-minute brain break with exercises that the kids can learn and then continue to do at home. She's looking at some various ways to work the arts in through that. So as they're doing those packets and creating that material, they're trying to make it as non-worksheet as possible, and keep in mind that this is to keep kids engaged with learning and with their brain, to reinforce that information. We're trying to make it as low impact to the parents as possible, because we realize they are working. I've been trying to work with 3 middle schoolers at home. I am sensitive to this plight. So we're trying to take all of that into consideration as we put this together, and then also working with Jason's team to make sure that we have proper supports and things in place to make it as accessible as possible.
Right. Because we do hear a lot about people hating worksheets. So I just wanted to make that point. And my other question, I guess, is for Jason in regards to the IEPs. One of my schools, 20% of the student population have IEPs. And I can pretty much tell you when they start making these phone calls, they're not going to have good numbers. Are there going to be supports to help people? I assume we're not just going to be able to make one phone call and say we tried. What kind of supports? This seems like a really challenging task, especially in a school that has so many.
Sure. And, parent participation in the IEP team process is vital to it being successful, right? I will say that at this point, the state has been clear that we need to make every attempt that we can to meet IEP guidelines. Deadlines rather. I anticipate that some of that guidance will change. As Mr. Dupler referenced, we're getting new information from the state almost daily at this point, because the further into this we get, the tougher it's going to be to have those annual IEP meetings, because we're not going to have current data on our students anyway. At this point, while they do expect us to try to meet those deadlines in our IEPs, we have been given a little bit of flexibility in terms of documenting our attempts. Again, parent participation is such an important piece of the process. And you're right, not everybody has working phone numbers. Not everybody has access to tools like Zoom and other things that we may use to try to have these meetings digitally. So certainly that's something we're aware of, and we'll definitely work with school level personnel to keep records of that, demonstrate our attempts to meet our current standard based on what the state's telling us.
Okay, Ebony, do you have a question directly with that? Because two other people had questions.
Oh, yes, directly to, there's a suggestion that I know one of our schools are doing.
Go ahead.
That's the principal, one of my schools, their principal has asked their teachers to create phone trees. And so they break up their student population because they know that it will be difficult to hunt them down, to start communicating with them. And so just putting that suggestion, maybe having the principals identify 5 to 6 teachers that can create that phone tree to have that segment of groups of kids that they can reach out to.
Okay. I know, Ms. Bounds, did you have a question? Ms. Hill, I know you did, but I think Ms. Bounds was first. Patty, your mic is not on.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, mine wasn't so much a question. It's just, I just appreciate all that we've been briefed on, all the great questions from all the different board members, and all that I've learned that has gone on behind the scenes that we were not aware of. And I certainly hope the public and parents have listened in or will listen in since this is being recorded. I think one of the hardest things was that we were on spring break when other systems were handing out packets and going online. I feel like the public forgot that we really, it was our spring break. And listening to Dr. Roswick and Miss Jackson, I just am so impressed with the thought and the engagement that has gone into everything to try to establish a learning system for 60,000 students. We have a very large system, and to do it in an equitable way that follows the state and federal laws and guidelines, it has just been very educational for me. And also, I just wanted to let them know how much I appreciate everything they were doing last week behind the scenes to make learning possible for our students. And personally, from what I've heard from other systems, I think we have a much stronger and better plan going forward. You know, I was aware of multiple systems personally that were handing out packets and things. I know, but we have to be careful, like to address Miss Christie's comment about, you know, worksheets, and that's not considered best practices. And then how do we get them distributed? Because this was just one system in one school, but out of 800 packets that were made, 250 were picked up. And so I think we have to be very cognizant of waste, especially if you've been in schools and known the paper shortage that teachers sometimes reference. So, you know, to make 800 packets available in 250, we just need to be very cognizant. I love Miss Jackson's ideas about doing it to go online and it being more activity based and engaging with an activity. So that was all. And a reminder that we did have a great place. Thank you. A great plan. Thank you, Superintendent Thomas, for feeding all of our children this week. And I think that's something we forget about, and something that was also a high priority last week was having a way to feed all of these kids when this week, after spring break, when this week started. It's gone fairly well. So that's really all I had. I've just been listening and learning, and wanted to make sure and thank everybody for their work.
Ms. Hill.
I do support many of Ms. Bound's comments, and especially the situation, not only with our food, but keeping in mind that we are coming off of a week of spring break. So even though it feels like our kids have been out in eternity, when we're talking about actual instruction days, right now we are talking about 4 days. That's 4 too many. You know, I absolutely am not any happier than anybody else about what we're all having to deal with, but it isn't like we are at this moment in a situation where our kids are losing weeks. And I hope it doesn't come to that, although time will tell. I do want to be sure, though, before we get off this meeting, that we have, and if this is something, Mr. Dupler, that requires a vote, I will leave at your discretion, but I would really like some very specific clarity about what our teachers can do in regard to contacting their students. Is it okay to try to have a class gathering, so to speak, online if the students have access? A lot of our kids don't have devices. A lot of them have telephones. Can they use Zoom and these types of things moving forward? And that may be a question that we don't want to answer now, but we'll need to in the next few days. But in the meantime, clarification before this call is over, before this meeting is over, that in fact our teachers can now begin contacting their students.
Mr. Dupler.
Sure. What we can say right now is that teachers can certainly contact their students, and students can contact their teachers to make sure the lights came on. To make sure that that everybody's okay, right? Reach out and say, hey, is everybody healthy? Is everybody safe? Those are the types of things that we should be able to do no matter what. But more to your question about learning and getting a class together and things like that, I think that's something that is evolving over time. Dr. Reiswick talks about a great plan going forward, and Shannon Jackson has done a lot of good work on that. But I think there's still a lot of details that need to be worked out. So And your other question was, does the board have to weigh in at this point? The answer is no. The director of schools, Mr. Thomas, is tasked with charting this course the best he can, considering all of the guidance from CDOE, USDOE, and all the other laws that apply. So, this board can continue to rely upon him to do the best job that he can, and have the faith in him to do so. So, but with that said, if the board wants to make a vote on something, then the board has the power as well.
All right, thank you for that. I do think it's so urgent. Our mission is to educate all of our children. And I recognize that we have a lot of barriers in front of us, more specifically directed to some of our SPED students, and also to some of our lower socioeconomic students that fall under those parameters, that may not have access that others have. We do need to remember, though, that we've got 60,000 students in this system, and we need to be thinking about all 60,000 of them. I appreciate the parameters that surround IEPs, that surround our special need kids. I understand them well. I would hope that our system would continue, and I know we will, to act in good faith for all of our students, even though we may not be able to make every accommodation that we'd like to for all of our students today or tomorrow. I think we can demonstrate that we intend to make every accommodation that can possibly be made. As I may have said earlier, even if that means perhaps going into summer months to meet the needs of some of our most challenged students, then we need to be prepared to do that. We need to be conscious, though, that even though our entire nation is dealing with this, that we do have many students in Knox County, thousands, in fact, that are moving forward with their education. And that in of itself is going to create inequities and barriers to widen even more what the public schools might be facing. So we need to look at every single option that we can possibly use for as many students as we can moving forward, so that the least amount of our students are affected negatively throughout this time in education.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. Ms. Babb?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. One of them is, at all of our schools, we have a lot of classified staff like TAs, office staff. Could they do some of this work, be brought in to help, not in, but be tasked with helping with some of this work? Like, Miss Christie was concerned about the number of students at some schools that have IEPs that need to be contacted. Can we use our classified staff to help with some of this that's going on, or what are the parameters on that?
I think so. Again, we're continuing to pay all of our employees during this closure. So, and folks would need to be available. Again, I think we would have to really structure the work around the guidelines and just make sure that we were following the guidelines. But again, I don't know if Mr. Duper wants to weigh in on that, or Mr. Bolton. But my opinion is, yes, we can utilize staff that we have. We just need to follow the guidelines in doing so.
And also, Ms. Babb, I'm sure that some of you have also heard from other organizations and entities who have offered their assistance. I've spoken with Jonathan Schoonover at Great Schools Partnership. They stand ready to help us in whatever way they can. Ellie Kittrell from the Muse have offered to help. So, and there are and those two entities, obviously have great contacts with other resources in the community that I'm sure would be able to help us. So I think as we're thinking outside the box and in approaching some of these issues in a way that we're not used to, we need to see how those entities can help us reach the kids, because Jonathan and Cheryl at Great Schools Partnership, they're the ones who have the resource, or who have the relationships with our community schools and those families, and they are probably the best suited to help figure out how to serve those families. So let's make sure that we are engaging with them and utilizing what they already have in place or can easily put in place, just based on the way that they do their day-to-day business already. Ms. Satterfield?
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up with Great School Partners, because I don't work for them and I'm not speaking for them, but I do think that they would be a great entity for them to be the community hub of all the people that want to volunteer and be supportive of just volunteers in the community, versus coming to KCS to figure out how to get plugged in, using them as the resource or the hub of resources to get people who have the desire to serve and want to serve, to get them plugged in. I think that that's a great idea. And I think that we should leverage our community partners in that way, to guiding them and guiding volunteers in that direction. But I do want to ask a question, and I don't know if we have an answer or not, but just kind of put it on record. How are we guiding preschool is there any guidance with that, or is it just kind of, it was already just a volunteer program that we had in KCS? We don't have the means. I want somebody to speak on that.
And also, Mr. Myers, if you'll speak on that, and then if there are any legal issues surrounding that I'm assuming that would be different because it is voluntary. That I'm assuming that would be a different situation. So if you can provide any insight in that respect.
Sure, I'll talk briefly about pre-K and of course meeting the needs of our kids with disabilities in our pre-K programming. As you know, students under IDEA are covered age 3 through 22. So I have assigned one of my special ed supervisors to work on that with that group in terms of developing resources. Those resources may look very different, and again, it could come down to utilizing our folks to work consultatively with parents, to discuss strategies that they may be able to use in the home to meet the needs of our pre-K kids. We, as you know, our program's outstanding. Shelly Everly and her folks do a tremendous job, and I have no doubt they'll be able to work well with the rest of the CNI team in developing resources for our families.
Okay. Any other questions? Ms. Babb?
One other one, and this is probably for either Ms. Jackson or Mr. Ryswick, and it's very specific to certain schools. So if it just needs to be offline about these schools, but I've had a lot of questions about the IB program and if those type of classes like AP can get continued because they are kind of needing to follow a international model. And then at magnet schools where they have some specialized training at their magnet schools that are not offered elsewhere, but the students are there at that school for that special thing, can those schools be offering some of their magnet curriculum?
Okay, I'm not sure I understand the magnet question as much. As far as the IB question, yes, they can continue and continue to work with those students. We know we're expecting another FAQ to come from IB, and it actually may be out. They said it would be out by the 27th to provide some follow-up to their announcement on Monday. So yes, IB falls under the same parameters as AP and the industry certs, and that the teachers do need to be engaged with that work. In fact, as they're working through that process, the teachers are the ones who are collecting the information they need to be able to send to IB. We do not want to be in the way of the students earning those EPSO credits.
And the magnets might have to be more specific to those schools and actually directed to those principals and then through administration.
I would say if there's a specific magnet question, if they would reach out to me, then I'll work with them to try to understand what they're asking and work through that.
I'm just looking through the list of emails and things that issues that people brought up. I've heard from a few people regarding a teacher parade that some teachers wanted to drive through neighborhoods and just wave and say hello to their students, like I've seen online. I think it was in Utah. And can Superintendent or Mr. Dupler, if you can comment on this type of activity, that would be helpful.
I don't know if Mr. Dupler wants to weigh in on that or not. You know, from the standpoint of a parade, you know, to see this again, I would think that we want people to do what they have been advised to do, is, you know, stay in and try to get this thing under control. However, I know people are out, but if people exercise the caution, I can't imagine that a vehicle with several people in it would be a good thing in terms of following the guidelines that have been issued. So I'm not sure how you do a parade if you're the only person in the car and you're driving. You know, again, I don't know about that. I'll let Gary. Gary, if you want to say anything, I just don't know what to say other than let's follow the guidelines. And the guidelines have been, you know, stay at home unless you have to get out. And I know our teachers want to. We talked about building those relationships with kids, and I know our kids and students want to see our teachers, and teachers want to see our students. But again, I think we just all have to exercise the caution that we've been advised to exercise with this thing, because I still feel like I'm not an expert on it, but I feel like it's going to get worse before it ever gets better. So just make sure that people do follow what the guidelines are. So I'm not saying don't do a parade, but that, you know, I'm not going to police that for sure. So
well, I agree with you, Bob. You know, the guidelines have been issued by the state and federal authorities at this point, and then of course our local mayors have weighed in as well. So and of course the Knox County Health Department. So you know, I think the school system needs to comply with that as best they can. And you know, a parade in the traditional sense obviously would not be a good idea of a bunch of people, you know, in a walking or you know, a marching parade. But certainly if somebody's in a vehicle, that might be different. But I think the guidance is, you know, you're better off if you're a teacher or a student and you want to connect, do it electronically, do it by telephone. Try that first before using other methods.
Okay, Ms. Bounce, I see your hand, and I also saw Ms. Babb. Did you have a question on this topic?
Go to Ms. Bounds first.
Okay, Ms. Bounds.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think being a former teacher, I think the idea was very cute. It was very organic. It was very well received online and social media. But I think the bigger issue is that our teachers need to model correct behavior. And if what Superintendent Thomas was saying and our law department is we need to follow the guidelines that our government officials have asked us to follow. And so I don't think we need to get off in the weeds, afraid or not afraid, but I think the general thing is just to follow the guidelines. So I think that's a very important point that they made. And I'll relinquish to Ms. Babb.
Thank you, Ms. Babb.
This is my last question, I promise. I have been asked if Zoom is a platform that at all grade levels, even if it's just checking in, almost having like a kindergarten class, all who are able, obviously, just as a check-in to wave to their teacher type thing, is that a platform that we're allowing teachers to use?
Mr. Thomas, do you want to take that?
We're working on it.
Okay.
So there'll be further.
There's Dr. Isaac.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. I think I'm in. All right. No, that's, I was talking to Ms. Byer too, to kind of see what we had the capabilities of. I think when Ms. Nixon and Ms. Jackson and Ms. Byer got together to kind of go through again, what our teachers are have been to what we know that we provided training for in the past. We were on Canvas and Aspen, Microsoft Team, and then a phone. Those are the ones that we felt the most comfortable that we wouldn't have to do additional training for. So I'm gonna, Microsoft Team would be our better option for that than Zoom would be. You know, there's a lot of different things that are out there. Again, it's kind of what we can support through IT, and looking across the table at Gail to make sure this is correct. Look at what we can support as IT, and then also feel like our teachers are trained to be able to do. So that would not be one that we would put out as one of those platforms at this time.
Can I just ask you, and this is, my lack of knowledge and probably the general public's, like a thing like Microsoft Team, is it something like Zoom where a bunch of people can go into it, or I just don't know anything about it?
Okay, I just got the consultant with Gail. So she said, yes, our staff and students are already loaded in Microsoft Teams, so that would be an easier one. So I think those are other things we have to consider too. The fact that what we can centrally load in and kind of make happen. And I think Microsoft Team is one that works with those other systems we talk with and would be easier for our teachers to use.
Thank you.
Ms. Satterfield?
Yes, just to Virginia's point, I just want to be on record and make sure that we are really mindful of realities for some of our kids. To Terry's point, I do definitely agree that, we have 60,000 kids to who we can educate. We need to educate them, but the social aspect and like the collectiveness of those opportunities, that there's kids out here that are basically being punished because of their income or their upbringing, to be able to log into Zoom and be in a classroom setting to say hi to their friends. And so I think that we need to have clear boundaries from the district level of what teachers can do and what teachers cannot do, because it is unfair to these kids that don't have internet access. I think about some of the areas in my community and even in rural East Knoxville, to where there is no internet access. You can't even get Comcast over in that area. Also, the devices situation, I had a parent that reached out to me that said, we have a smartphone, but we don't have the capabilities of a smartphone, like some of the iPhones or the Androids. They can't get on Canvas through their smartphone. So I just, the assumptions that we make, that we keep in mind that there are people that just really do not have access. So as strict with what teachers can do and cannot do, as not strict, but just as clear as possible, so that kids won't be punished because they're poor or just don't have access.
I think we go back to, I'm sorry, Terry, you want to go first?
Patty, your hand was up first earlier.
Well, I was just going to say, I think we're getting into what teacher, and I do agree with you that we need to have some very good guidelines that everyone understands. But if I heard Dr. Roswick correctly, most of this is supposed to be generated as a district and not individual classrooms and teachers as far as the learning. And so I think what we're getting into is more the social emotional effect rather than the learning. I did have one question, if Bob can address it after this, and that is, what are the plans for the central office personnel and like operations and maintenance? Do we have plans for all of those employees as well? But you couldn't wait to answer that after Terry weighs in on the other. But I just think we're confusing academic and social emotional, and I think we're have to be very careful, like Ms. Satterfield said, that teachers just don't go Wild West on us. So anyway, okay, thanks.
Thank you. Terry, did you have a follow-up to that?
No. I'm
Okay.
fine.
Okay, so back to Ms. Bound's question. Superintendent Thomas, did you want to take that?
I can, and we've been working again last week and this week too. We've got some ways that folks can work remotely, so we're trying to adhere to the guidelines as well, and the health department about staying safe, and so there's work being done here remotely with folks getting phones and so forth from home. It's not as convenient, as we'd like for it to be, but again, we want to try to do our part to flatten the curve, so to speak. In terms of, and we'll be adhering to this through the remainder of the time that this is in effect. We will, again, our maintenance and custodial workers, again, it's just more of a day-by-day sort of situation. Once the health department relieves or loosens their restrictions, then we'll get back to more, hopefully get back to more normal work. But we want to try to make sure the work continues, and to do that remotely, and then respect again, the guidelines that have been given to us by the governor, the health department, the CDC. And let me just say too, I appreciate the board's support so much on all this. I know the board's gotten lots of emails. We're getting lots of emails, and no parents are concerned, our teachers are concerned. And, I'll still say, we've got the best students in the world. We got the best teachers and principals in the world. We got the best board in the world. So, and the best team. This is such a talented team that we have, and they care so much for our students, and it's just unbelievable. I know you don't get to see much of it from a distance, but for me, it's just unbelievable at the amount of work that the team does, and trying to make sure that we're doing the right things. And also Mr. Dupler and his availability. He's been in on our conference calls. He's advised us, and again, just be assured we're looking for every way to make sure that we provide an equitable educational opportunity for all our students, and we're going to continue to do so. So again, thank you, board, for your support, and for this afternoon, because I think it's been good.
Thank you, Superintendent. And I think we'll wrap it up with that. And I just want to, and we will have board forum, but if I can just tag on to what Bob has said, and Terry mentioned it earlier, it is important to remember that last week was spring break. Our executive staff they typically don't necessarily get the whole week off, but they usually get a little bit of spring break off, and they really had no break whatsoever. And so, so just so the public knows, they have been working quite hard all last week and this week. And I appreciate all that time and energy. And I think it's, I know from just our conversation today and the plan that you've sent us yesterday that you do have a lot going on. And just to kind of remind the public too, that we are a very unique district of 60,000 students with rural, urban, and suburban communities, and it's extremely complex. So when you look at other cities that have only one of those, that makes it simpler. So we have a very, very complex organization, and it's just very difficult for the average person to really understand even a little bit of that complexity, because there's so many factors. So thank you for this time, Superintendent, that we could kind of talk through some of that, and hopefully people have gotten some insight, and I hope that we'll be able to move forward in a way that all our students can continue learning and be motivated to learn, and that we can provide the assistance that parents are looking for. And so unless anybody has an objection, I'm going to go to board forum. Ms. Satterfield, are you good with that? Okay, so let's go to board forum, and Mr. Kelly, let's start with you. We haven't heard anything from you. Thank you for being here.
He has an announcement.
Oh, let's hear it.
Why'd you have to do me like that, Evity?
Because I knew you weren't going to do it, and I'm not sitting by you to hit you to tell you to do it.
Well, I mean, it wasn't really, I mean, it's kind of related to what I was going to say, but I'll say what I wanted to say and then I'll tell you all. So first off, for those of you who are taking honors and AP level courses, just a couple of recommendations. Khan Academy has a very good plethora of resources that you can do, including educational videos. Also, I was fortunate enough last summer, right before senior year, I was an intern for Fiveable, which is an AP test prep company. And I know that they, in addition to a company called Marco Learning, have been giving out free resources for almost every single AP class. So if you're trying to cram for those 45-minute free response tests, those are really good resources. Second of all, I just like to say that my heart goes out to all the students, regardless of what grade you're in, from the youngest pre-K to my fellow seniors. I just want to say, I know that this can be a hard and overwhelming time for everybody, especially being away from school with all the uncertainty. So I just wanted to say that I really feel for you all. And if you need anything, whether it's just someone to tell you a knock-knock joke to make you smile, or recommendations for a book to read while we're still on this quarantine break, just feel free to reach out to me. Also, for those of you who are seniors, I know that this week is a pretty big week. This is the last of college decisions. Tonight is Ivy League decision night. So for all of you who applied there, good luck. And I hope that you all get exactly what you deserve and you just have a great opportunity for that. My heart is literally racing at 180 beats per minute because they come out in about an hour and 20 minutes. But to that note, I did get into Vanderbilt yesterday, which is super exciting. So yeah, that's what Evity wanted me to tell you, everybody. But yeah, I just wanted to say I love all of you students in Knox County, all over the place. And if you need anything, feel free to reach out.
Congratulations. That is fantastic news, Noah.
Yeah. Yes.
Absolutely. Great. Okay, Miss Satterfield, we'll just go right in order.
No problem. Thank you. He also got into Vanderbilt with a nice financial aid package, but I'll toot his own horn because he's not going to toot it.
That's awesome.
I just want to reiterate what everyone said. I really appreciate the thought process that went into developing this kind of plan. I know we all been getting hit from all type of angles about what are we doing, but I appreciate Knox County Schools for taking a step back to really develop a robust plan that's going to cast the net as wide as possible, where it's just the reality. We're not serving school. We're not in session with school. We're just providing learning resources that we can continue to engage people while we're out. And I think if we have that understanding as a community and as a school system, then we can move forward in what we're doing. But we're not in school buildings. We're not going to our different schools and our teachers are not there. So if everyone just kind of can wrap their minds around what we're doing here is providing educational services so that students will not have so much summer loss and so much just a year loss of educational services. So I really appreciate Knox County Schools leadership for just stepping back and figuring out a concrete plan that we can roll out. And so I just think that you all did a really good job and I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Miss Owen.
Thank you. I also appreciate what we've done. I'm really glad that we are providing resources without calling them something that they're not, and that we're being really clear about what we are providing and what we can do with them. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Let's go to Miss Babb.
Yes, I want to thank all our administration. I know this has been difficult. I know that they have been fielding our questions as well as the community's questions throughout all this. And I do probably want to reiterate what everybody else is saying. We have a huge community of very different needs and abilities, and we're doing our best. And everybody out there is not going to be happy with everything we're doing, but I hope that people can work with us as we're trying to do better and we're trying to do more and can appreciate what we're trying to do. And we are really, it's working under a tough circumstance, And just, I hope that people can work with us. But obviously, if you have questions, reach out to all of us. That's what we're here for. But do know this is changing every single day. And no one 2 weeks ago would have ever dreamed our country would be where we are right now. And who knows where we'll be 2 weeks from now. So just continue to work with us.
Very wise. Thank you, Ms. Babb. Ms. Bounds?
Yes, I just wanted to again thank the staff for all the planning and work that went in last week to feeding our students and coming up with an academic plan. But I also wanted to thank the public and the parents for all the emails that I have received. It does help the board to hear from people and to know what you're thinking and what your concerns are. I was caught up 2 days ago and then answered each individually, but I got lost last night in all the emails and today. So you may not have heard back from me, but I know that I love working with this board. This is a fantastic board, and we have heard your concerns. We've read your emails, and we've taken your phone calls and texted back. So if you haven't, it just means that we've been swamped. And so hope you will give us some grace in that. But thank you for taking the time to email us and let us know what you're thinking.
Absolutely. Thank you. Mr. McMillan?
I want to make a comment. My voice is not very good, but I want to, I look at it a little bit different. I think that all the comments were good, but particularly I want to mention what the superintendent said and what Ebony was talking about as far as kids not having access to things, and even what Russ mentioned as far as having people show up in mass at the food distribution place. Now, I'm sure things will change, but as long as we could provide something to somebody without, I personally don't think teachers should be going out to the schools to get materials. That's just my opinion, because if they go in the schools and no matter how careful they are, who knows, they could be exposing something. Hopefully not, but the purpose of the directive from the governor was to stay home now, or get out and play golf or walk in the park or something like that. But from an educational standpoint, my guess, and it obviously is nothing but a sheer guess, we're going to leave, or whatever you want to call it, probably 20 to 25,000 of the 60,000 that are not going to have access. They said there was what, 17,000. That's great. Wow. Electronic media that I suppose that's fine. But it does still bother me.
Can you guys hear Mr. McMillan?
No.
I'm cutting in and out.
There you go. Now we can hear you.
Mr. Mike.
Did you hear any of
Yeah.
The last couple of minutes, we didn't hear you. Last minute or so.
Well, I was just saying, anything we could do that helps the kids by electronic media. I do not think that we should be going out into the school individually, because somebody can do it unknowingly. It lasts a while. I just think that along what the lines of the super saying is we need to mainly concentrate on staying in. That was the purpose of the grant from the government. And I don't want, but did you hear this? Then I would guess that 20 to 25,000 kids will not have access. No, you didn't hear that, or no, you don't agree with me.
That's about where you started to put out.
Sitting there shaking your head. But anyway, that's, I appreciate everybody. I do agree with superintendent. We have incredible staff. We have tons of very, very good teachers. They're coming out with more and more knowledge. There's more and more stuff to be learned, obviously. And I think that Knox County as a whole and the communities, everything are benefiting from this.
We can't hear you again.
Okay, but I'm about through. But I just want us to be cautious about not trying to follow the order that the governor put out as far as staying away from places because of the fact that I think it's going to whatever term you want.
We can't hear you at all, Mike.
Probably close to a third. Okay, I'll quit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, Terry, I think I skipped you. I apologize.
Oh, that's all right. I do applaud the superintendent and his staff. I know you all have worked so hard. I have to say on a personal note, I'm so proud of so many teachers that have just jumped in and done all that they can. And I'm excited through this meeting. I hope that they will feel like they have a little more freedom to move forward in contacting and helping our students to feel engaged. I do want to caution our board that we need to be very careful in the decisions that we make moving forward, though, that we do not increase disparities. And by that, I mean looking at our nation in forcing and having students that do have access, preventing them from moving ahead because it is not available collectively for everyone. In the end, we could end up with as many potentially unhealthy and unwise scenarios as we could going too far the other way. So I think it's very important that as a system, we continue to strike a balance and consider what is the best action for the whole, collectively for the whole. Everybody be safe out there.
Okay, wait, we got Miss Christie.
Yes, I just want to piggyback on what everybody else has said. Thank you to our superintendent and Dr. Roswick and everyone else on the team. And I really do appreciate you all working so hard to put this together. I also want to thank all of our volunteers that are getting out there to feed our kids. You know, we've had a lot of support in that area with volunteers, and I appreciate the extra sites that you guys added to that as well. And finally, thank you to our parents and students for showing us a little grace and understanding. We'll get through this and we'll figure it all out. But, you know, I don't think we need to rush into anything without fully vetting it and making sure that we do have supports in place. So other than that, and tell my parents that I am loving, that homeschool memes they are sending me. So please keep them coming because they are pretty entertaining, and I think we can all use a laugh right now. So thanks.
Yes, and thank you all to all the board members. And as Noah mentioned, you know, I think that all board members would join me in saying that our hearts go out to our seniors and really a lot of the high school students who have summer or spring sports, and but particularly to our seniors who are, this is not at all the way they envisioned their last 9 weeks of school. And so our hearts are just really going out to these seniors. And I know that they want answers about what's going to happen. And so just bear with us as things play out. And I know the superintendent will get information out as soon as it's clear, but we just kind of have to be patient as this is such an evolving situation. So thank you all so much for your time. And I think that we are adjourned.
Congratulations, Noah.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations. That's so awesome.
Thank you.
Can you let us know if you get good news tonight?
Yes, ma'am. It's literally an hour away, and I'm. Oh.
Let Terry Courtney know, and she can let us know.
We want to know.
Can we FaceTime Noah when you
Okay,
open the email?
Oh, yeah. I'll live stream on my Instagram so that everyone can watch me burst into tears.
Okay.
Vanderbilt is huge. That is so hard to get in Vanderbilt. I mean,
he got a check too, Virginia. He's going for a little or nothing.
Awesome. We're so proud of you.
So proud.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.